Hi everyone, my name is Samantha Gibson from the Digital Public Library of America. Welcome to today's DPLA workshop, Advanced GIF-Making Techniques. DPLA workshops are online learning opportunities highlighting subjects central to our community, including education, technology, copyright, genealogy, and more. We are particularly excited to offer today's workshop as part of a two-part series in conjunction with our upcoming annual GIF-Making competition, GIF IT UP. In today's workshop, our two presenters, Darren Cole and Richard Naples, will share with us how to use photo editing software to perform advanced GIF-making techniques, such as how to use frame animation and how to make GIFs from videos. If you have Photoshop and would like to try out the new techniques along with our presenters, you can download the files we'll be working with from the workshops page of our website now. If you don't have Photoshop, don't worry. Stick around, and many of these techniques can be replicated in other free photo editing programs. A few quick pieces of housekeeping before we begin. You'll notice that you are in listen-only mode. If you have questions throughout the presentation or if you are experiencing technical difficulties, please feel free to type them into the questions box, and we'll do our best to address any issues. For this webinar, we'll have approximately 40 to 45 minutes worth of slide or presentation, followed by approximately 10 minutes for questions. So please do feel free to enter questions throughout the presentation, and we'll do our best to get to them at the end. We are recording this presentation, and we'll post a copy of it to the workshops page shortly following the end of the session, along with additional resources recommended by our presenters. Without further ado, let me introduce today's presenters. Richard Naples works in Digital Projects and Initiatives Division of the Smithsonian Libraries, where he splits his time between maintaining the Smithsonian's research, bibliography, and digital repository, and working on outreach activities like running the Smithsonian Library's Tumblr, Turning the Book Wheel. Darren Cole is a digital engagement specialist with the Office of Innovation at the National Archives. He works on a variety of web and social media projects, including archives.gov, the new crowdsourced history platform at historyhub.archives.gov, plus all of the GIFs you see on today's document, which you can find at todaysdocument.tumblr.com. Richard will be presenting first and then handing the figurative mic to Darren for the second half of the session. Richard, take it away.
Okay, hello everybody. Thank you, Samantha. My name is Richard Naples again. I work for the Smithsonian Libraries, where I run our Tumblr and make all of our GIFs. In this segment, I'll be showing you how to turn illustrations into animated GIFs using Photoshop's frame animation. As you'll see, I have Photoshop CS6. Most of these techniques will work with other versions, though, so just keep that in mind. The open source software package GIMP has similar tools, and I gave Samantha a link to a tutorial that I think is pretty good. And then I will let you know there's a more advanced technique using keyframe animation that I won't be covering, but I definitely implore you to go check it out. Go to the School of YouTube. Okay, so I just want to go over the agenda of what I'm going to cover today. I would like to start with some basic layout of Photoshop and how GIFs work and that sort of thing. Then I'd like to go into different animation techniques that you can do using frame animation, such as moving, making things appear or disappear, changing color, and transformation. Next, I'll demonstrate how you turn an image or illustration that you can find in DPLA into an animated GIF, and I'll be using a butterfly illustration to demonstrate that. And finally, I'll just show you how to export your animated GIFs before turning over the reins to Darren. All right, so I just want to start with the basics of GIFs. On Tumblr, you can only post a GIF that is under 540 pixels wide and under 2 megabytes. So that's limitations you're working in. Also, GIFs have a limit of about 256 colors that you're able to get out of there. The size of the GIF really depends on how complicated it is. So images with static backgrounds and where fewer pixels change from frame to frame will work better for you. So I want to show you how to use frames and layers to create animation. To do this, I'm going to start with a blank document to just show you some of the basics. So you can follow along if you have Photoshop available. I'm going to create a new document. Size isn't important right now, so I'm going to make the width of this document 540 pixels, which is the GIF limit on Tumblr. So we'll go ahead and create that. You need to make sure that your tools are showing. So along the left, your tools. And if you don't have your layers, go to Windows, turn on Layers. And then the other thing is to turn on the timeline panel. That's over here. If you have CS5 or before, you're going to have to, it's called the animation layer. So you need to go find that instead of timeline. Once you turn that on, you'll get this panel over here where in the center of it, you'll have a choice between frame animation and video timeline. And you want to choose create frame animation and go ahead and click create it. This will give you different frames down on the bottom over here. And your layers will be over here. This is the basic layout of what you'll need to do animation in Photoshop. A good way to think about animated GIFs is to think of them like a flip book. Each page in that flip book is like a frame in the timeline. So once you have everything set up in Photoshop, it's time to show you some simple animation techniques. So I'm going to go ahead and create a new layer, which you can do a number of ways. One is layer, new layer. Control-Shift-N is another great way. And we're just going to create one for each of the things I want to do. So I'm going to go ahead and create a couple more layers here. Okay. So I'm going to start by adding a shape on each of these. I'm just going to use the brush tool just to show you, basic kind of thing. So I'm going to start with one dot there. I'm going to go to the next layer, put a dot, another dot here, and a third one. One thing I will point out that's very helpful is you can organize your layers. You can rename things. So I'm going to call this one Move, and then we'll call this one Flicker Effects, and the last one Transform. You also have the option, if you right-click any of these, to give them a color. You can also use one of these icons down here to create a tool or create a new group, which is very helpful to organize your work. So now we can turn our attention to the frames in the frame panel. Well, you think of layers, they're your basic building blocks in Photoshop. The frames, however, are those pages in the flipbook. So I want to go over the timeline really quickly, some of the things that you can do in here. First, there's the duplicate frame button. This will take whatever frame you have selected and make another frame. To delete a frame, you always use this little delete key, this icon here, because if you hit the delete button on your keyboard, you're going to delete whatever frame or whatever layer you have selected, and that's not a good thing. Beneath each of these is a delay. So beneath each frame, you can set the delay. So that's how long it'll stay on the screen. I'm just going to start with 0.1 seconds. And then, very important, your looping over here. So that's, appears once. You always want that to be on forever. It's very rare you wouldn't want it on there. And so finally, once you have a few frames, you have your preview, which lets you press play to sort of preview your GIF as you do it. Then one more thing is the tween icon, and I'll get to that later. And then finally, the option menu, the panel menu up here is available, and there's a lot of different things you can do in there. It's worth exploring. I'm not going to go into those, though. Okay, so the first one I want to do is to move a layer to show you basically how to create movement in between these frames. Basically, you start with the move layer selected and the frame that you want to start with selected. I'm going to go ahead and switch to the second frame and then use my select tool to just move this a little bit. You can drag it, you can use your arrow keys, whatever you do, and just click to get rid of the bounding box. So now you'll see that on the first frame, it's in one position, second frame, it's on another position. If you preview, you'll see it's moving. That's a lot of the basic techniques of creating GIFs, is the change between these frames on the timeline. So I'll move on to the next thing you can do, which is you can, and I'm going to go ahead and just delete this layer altogether. and move on to the flicker one. So another thing you do is between frames, you can actually hide it by clicking the little hide button, the little eyeball, and that will make it disappear in between the two frames. One thing I will show you is the tween button right now. What you can do is select more than one frame. You can do that holding down the command key as you select more than one, and then you hit this little tween. And what that does is it adds layers in between those two layers you have selected with it's like an a set of number of frames in between them to kind of show the variation. I might as well just show it to you. I added 5 different frames, and you'll see that it kind of fades out, and so it like splits the difference between the 2 frames you had selected. So I'm going to go ahead and get rid of those and move on to the next one. The other thing you can do in between in frame animation is add layer effects from frame to frame. So I don't know if people have used layer effects much, but they have a lot of options such as inner glow and outer glow or color overlay and a lot of different things. The outer glow is great if you want to make a light look like it's turning on or off. So you start with your frame and your layer as it is to start with. And then you go to your next frame, select that layer, and then go down here to the FX button. Then you can go ahead and choose what kind of color overlay. I'm going to do the color overlay because it's really easy. And now you see, if you preview, it will change color. And you can also use the tween to get in between the two and kind of show gradation over time. The other big way to animate in here is to transform things. To say, let's stretch out the ball, that I have here. That takes a slightly different approach. You can't go ahead and change this layer like we did before, of moving it around or turning it on or off. If I were to stretch it, I'll show you. If I stretched it out like this and clicked OK, you'll see it changed it in all of the layers, all of the frames of my animation, I'm sorry. So that's something you need to remember, that you can't transform something without it affecting that layer across all of the frames. So instead what you do is you create a duplicate frame. And you can do that up in the layer button, duplicate layer. You can right-click the layer and select duplicate layer, or Control-Shift-J is another way to do it. And I'll just right-click and duplicate the layer to show you. So in the first layer, we're going to make this first, on the first frame, we're going to make this first layer appear and the second layer disappear, not be appearing. So I'm going to switch it so that the first layer is not showing, but the second layer is. I'm going to use this bounding box to go ahead and stretch it out a little bit more. And you can click Enter to accept those changes. And now you need to make sure that the first frame has the first layer, the second frame has the second layer, and so on as you add more layers and transform it ever so slightly to get your variation. So you'll see it kind of animates that way. You can use this for if you need to rotate something, or if you need to stretch something out. You can even use great filters like the pinch or the twirl or something like that to give it a funky kind of technique. One of the great tips I want to show people, if you don't already know, if you have one of these layers and you have the bounding box, this little reference point, you can move that around. And so, if I have it in the middle and I rotate, it's just going to rotate from there. But if you kind of drag that down, that becomes where it rotates from. So just good tricks to know. That's the basics of frame animation in Photoshop, really. That's a lot of what you can do right there. Once you kind of get that down, you can really apply it to images to kind of make your way into, producing something amazing for the GIF It Up contests. I'm going to show you how to do that in a particular file that I found, and I share that with Samantha, and so everybody should have access to it. And I've already done a lot of the work of separating out the background and making sure that the butterflies are separated out. But I want to show you some of those techniques. So it's the butterfly example. I'm just going to go ahead and duplicate this image just into a new thing altogether. So we'll just create a new one and turn it on. This is an image from an 18th century French volume, Buffon's Planches illuminées d'histoire naturelle, tome 1, and that's from our natural history special collections, the Cullman Library, and you of course can find a full copy of this in DPLA and also in the Biodiversity Heritage Library, who originally scanned the work. I use butterflies because they really illustrate this technique. One of our most popular posts on Turning the Book Wheel ever was one of my first attempts at animating GIFs, and it was a butterfly plate, and it now has, I think, like 66,000 notes 3 years later. So I think this is a great image to show you for a few different reasons. One, it has a very easy background to remove, and the butterflies are easy kind of to put into their own layers. And then, I kind of feel like the animation, the bang for your buck is really great with this because all we're going to do is kind of stretch the wings around a little bit. So first thing we need to do is kind of separate out the butterflies from the background. And of course, in Photoshop, there's many ways to do this. You can use the marquee tool, which is great for selecting areas and then, create a new layer out of what you've selected. If you hold it down, there's different shapes you can use and that sort of thing. The lasso options, which include like magnetic ones and polygonal lasso tool, those are great things to use. And you can also do the, erase the background, try that, background eraser tool. But what I'm going to use in this one is just the magic wand. For the magic wand, that selects basically everything that's like the same color. You can get really specific with how it operates by messing around with the tolerance or the sample size and other things like that. I just make sure it's incongruous. And I like a tolerance, anywhere between like 20 and 40, depending on what you're doing. So you basically like click the magic wand and it selects this whole area. The other option in the magic wand, though, I'll show you, is the quick selection tool, and that's also great. And if you don't know any of these, I would just take, just try a Google search and see if you can find a quick explanation about what they do. It's a great way to, up your skills. So now that I've kind of like selected part of the background, I'm going to create a new layer out of that. And there's a few different ways to do that, of course. I'm just going to show you so you can see. I'm going to come up to layer and choose new layer via cut. And so you'll see that that creates a new layer with some of this background, whatever I've selected, and then leaves, what I didn't select behind. That doesn't take all of the background in this case. So one thing I'm going to do is just use the marquee tool, highlight just the butterflies, and then do that duplicate layer from the cut, or layer from cut. Just, oh, sorry. Should be layer from cut, but no big deal. We'll just erase these guys. Okay. So now we have basically our backgrounds over here and the butterflies up here. You can definitely, give these names to sort them out. But for right now, I'm just going to go ahead and grab these two layers. I hit the Shift key and selected both of them. You can also Control and select layers. And then I'm going to merge these together. That's another technique. And Control E is a great shortcut for it, a keyboard shortcut. But I'm going to right-click and just come down here and show you its merge layers. So that kind of gives us two layers, the image we want and then the background. I'm going to hide the butterflies right now and just focus on getting the background sorted out. Within any illustration you want to turn into a GIF, you're basically recreating the background, the gap of what you've taken away, and then trying to make sure it works throughout your whole story that you're putting together. I usually start with just a, I'll sample a color nearby and use the paint bucket to just fill in those holes, which, looks pretty passable, but I think we can do a lot better than this. But that does give us a kind of like foundation to work from. And then one of my favorite tools is the healing brush. But I will say there is depending on what version of Photoshop you have, there's something called the content aware fill. And so if you had like a hole or you selected an area, you go to edit and hit fill. And then you have the option, depending on what version of Photoshop you have this option to use content aware fill. And that kind of like looks around and tries to fill in the gaps using the computer's amazing brain, right? And I think that did a really good job of hiding, that gap. But sometimes if your background's a little more complicated, it'll pull in some weird stuff. So sometimes I'll just stick with the healing brush to kind of make sure everything's smoothed out in the way I want it. So this works. It's just a brush, and you can kind of like adjust how it looks and the size and other things like that. But what you do is you have to Alt-click. You hold down the Alt key while you select a reference area. And so I click that, and then whenever I come over and paint, it kind of picks up what's in that reference area and paints over it. And it's a really great, quick shortcut for cleaning this up. You'll see it's pretty darn good. Usually I'll run over it like a few times just to kind of get it figured out, just make sure that it's smoothed over and there's no like, empty, areas. But that's basically what you do to get the background. Some other tools I'll use is sometimes I will actually use the Lasso tool to kind of, pick up a section that's blank and then make a new layer from that, and then kind of like move that little piece around to fill in gaps, that sort of thing. So that's the kind of background situation. Now we're going to move on to actually animating and transforming these butterflies. I'm just going to do one of them because I know we're short on time. So I'm just going to take this guy up here, and I'm going to isolate him from the rest of my layer so that he's all by himself. By his own self. Okay, and I'm going to use the lasso tool to do this part, and I'll zoom in a little so you can kind of see. This is like something you hand draw around the section you want to take. You don't have to be perfect, so I'm just going to go ahead and kind of like draw his wing around his wing and grab this. And since the rest of the area is around him is empty, I'm not going to worry about being exact around that. So this, again, you can come in new layer via cut. So that will move this wing, if I click that, into a new layer. Select the back layer, the bottom layer, and then go ahead and grab his right wing. And then we'll just splice that into its own. So the wings are on their own and the body's right there. The body's not going to move, so we're not going to worry too much about that. You can go ahead and name these if you want, left wing, right wing kind of thing, but I'm just going to plow through to show you. At this point, we have, that separated out. Now we need to think about the animation. We want to make his wings flap. So that's a transform action. So I'm going to have to make duplicate layers and perform the transformation on those duplicate layers. If I were changing the color or moving him around just statically, like without making it look like he was flapping, I wouldn't have to duplicate these layers. I could just move it around from frame to frame. But I'm going to go ahead and duplicate this, and then the simple act of transform on this new layer will help me make it look like he's animating. I'm going to grab the reference point and bring it towards his body. And then all I'm going to do is kind of come to this bounding box and squeeze it in a bit. And it's going to make it look, it's kind of magic, makes it look like he's flapping his wings. So I'm going to take the other one and just bring this one in as well. Okay, so we have all our layers spliced out, and you can do that for each of the butterflies or for whatever you want to do. Like if you, make a skeleton wave, you want to section out his body and then make a new layer every time you rotate it, sort of thing. and then you're all done. Okay. So at this point, we're ready to create the frame animation. And again, use the panel to create frame animation. And it'll start with one frame. This first frame, what I'm going to do is hide the ones that I've transformed. So it starts out with it open. I'll add a new layer or a new frame that duplicates this one. I'll hide these layers, and I'll make these other layers show. And then I'm going to select both of these and set the delay to 0.1 second, and I'm going to make sure it's on forever. And then, basically preview, it kind of looks like he's flapping. And that's like the gist of this situation. If you want, you can add more layers and kind of like duplicate these layers a few times and mess around with the timing so it looks a little more organic. But that's the basics of animation and working with these images to do it. Each one is unique, and each one requires you to think through it a little bit. So at this point, we're ready to export, and I'm sorry I'm running a little over, but I just want to show you real quick. The last section on this is to export it as a GIF. You will find under most versions of Photoshop, under File, there's a Save for Web or Save for Web and Devices, and I don't have the Creative Cloud, but I think it's pretty similar. So you click that, save it, and I forgot to do one thing, and that is before I get to this point, I will try to change the image size so that I don't end up freezing anything. And also another thing that I've been forgetting to tell you all along is save often and save frequently and save to many places and just save, because it's sad when you lose something. I'm going to actually switch over to one I did before and go ahead and come into the image section and take the image size. And in this case, I'm going to make it pre-fit to that 540 pixel width that we know we need for Tumblr. And click OK, and that'll stretch it down. You can Command plus to make it bigger to see it more. And this again is just like a flapping. Oh, I guess the bottom one is the one who's flapping. At this point, File, Save for Web. This is the magic trick. It brings up this Save for Web panel where you can come into your presets and choose one of these GIFs pre-selected versions. You have the option to really mess around with all of these things, and I think Darren's going to get into some of those a little more. I'm just going to show you, I'm going to let you know that you can come into the maximum of 256. You can see what version is best. Typically it starts out with original and optimized. I like to go to the 4-up, so that gives me 4 versions to work with. So I can kind of mess around with the colors in this one, or on this one I can make sure it's more. And whatever you do, the big things you're looking for are, is the size under 2 megabytes? Is the dimensions of under 540 with pixels wide, and is it looping to forever? As long as you have those 3 components right, you can mess around with a lot of these things until it looks like what you want. And of course, you can preview it. So I think this one's pretty good. It's a really small one, and I'm just going to go ahead and save it. And then you kind of, figure out where you want to save it and what you want to call it, and that's about it. So that is the basic technique I use for making animated GIFs. Of course, you're only limited by that size, the dimensions, Photoshop, and your own imagination and how much time you have. So at this point, I think I'm ready to turn everything over to Darren and move on to the other ways to make animated GIFs. So thanks, everybody.
All right, thanks, Richard. As always, that's going to be a tough act to follow. This is going to be a little more rudimentary. If you understood everything that Richard covered as far as Photoshop tools, then this will be pretty basic for you. and luckily he covered a lot of the other important aspects like Tumblr file sizes, which are usually sort of the main restrictions that we work with. So anyway, my name is Darren Cole. I work at the Office of Innovation for the National Archives. I do a lot of the work on today's documents, so if you've seen the GIFs there, I've made most of those. So we're going to cover making animated GIFs from video files, and if we have time, making GIFs from still images and still photos as well. So I'm going to jump right into Photoshop. Now, as Samantha mentioned, she provided a lot of the base files that we're going to be working with, so if you want to follow along, you can download those. If not, most of these are available from the National Archives catalog or eventually via DPLA's catalog. So the first one we're going to do is this old Army training film called Pleasure of Your Company. It is a very dated vintage Army etiquette training film, which really shows its age, but it also has a really fun sort of fashion show montage. So we've kind of cut that out of the main video just to save file size and to save time. So if you download the full image, it's going to be, the full video rather, it's going to be much, much bigger, but this one has been trimmed down just for convenience sake. So we'll start from the beginning. So assuming you're in Photoshop and assuming you've downloaded the file, you're going to go to File, and then the main command we want here is Import, and then import video frames to layers. And it's going to be somewhat different if we're importing still photos, but for importing video, this is the command we want. Then you're going to want to browse and find your file. So we don't need Walt Whitman right now, we want the video. So here it is, we've already downloaded it. And then it's going to bring you into the import video to layers dialog. And this is where you've got to make some important decisions early on. Now, as Richard said, Photoshop can crash often, which is, like he said, very sad and very upsetting and creates a lot of profanity at times. So the trick is early on is to limit your file size as much as possible. So you're going to want to really restrict the clip that you were going to use for your GIF to as short and as small as possible. So in that regard, you're going to choose some of these options, select range only, and then you're going to limit the number of frames. If you're making a really detailed, really short GIF, maybe you don't need to limit the frames, but for anything that's more than like 10 frames long, you're really going to need to limit this. I usually go for between 3 to 4 frames, so that means it's sampling every 3 or 4 frames out of the full video. For this exercise, we're going to go with 3 frames. Usually I go with 4, but I'll show a certain technique here. You'll see why I'm using 3 frames here. Make sure make frame animation is checked, and then you'll see your video here. You can play it if you want. And then you can also scroll through and find the exact clip that you want. Now the clip we want is this one here, where she's showing off some of her jewelry, and then she's kind of waving hi, and she even has hi written on her hand. So again, it's almost sort of a laugh-in style clip here. And then we can use these sliders here at the bottom, and that narrows in on the precise clip that you want. So like we said, we want this little bit here. You want to make sure you get both the beginning and the end. So we're going to scroll right back to right before where it starts. And likewise, we're going to scroll to the very end. We don't want to get too much, but we want to make sure we get the full clip that we're interested in. So you can see we've selected that range. We click OK. It's going to pull it in. And so now it's pulled in the video, and you see all the frames down below in the timeline window, and you're familiar with that from Richard's section. So, and you can see it's got a lot of frames now. We've got upwards of, in this case, 192. Now that's way too many frames. In my experience making GIFs for Tumblr, where again you want to keep it below 2 megs, I found that roughly between 18 and 24 frames is ideal to keep the file size under the max limit. So the first thing we're going to need to do is trim some of these frames out. Now obviously we know that we don't need this little bit here where she's talking to her commanding officer, so we can cut these frames out right away. And we'll just select those, so frames 1 through 12, and then we'll just hit the trash can and get rid of those. And then we'll scroll to the end and kind of do the same thing with these frames on the end and trash those. So now we're down to 176, so that's better, but still we have to get from 176 down to, we'll benchmark it at about 24 frames. So that means we've got a lot more to get rid of. Now, we can play the sequence through and see what we have selected and see what it looks like. So she shows off her jewelry, shows off her rings, and then she waves hi. There we go. So that's really the clip we want, is just really her waving. So the rest of the stuff where she's playing with the necklace, we're going to get rid of that, because it makes for a really long GIF, and really a GIF is really just a snapshot, as everyone knows. So you don't want it to be too long, because then you kind of lose your audience's attention, and it kind of loses the impact. If you really, especially if you're going for a reaction GIF, it's really just a split second in most cases. So, so we know we want the very end where she's waving high. And what we'll kind of do is go to the beginning of where that bit starts and try to identify where that kind of movement begins. So we'll start where she's kind of waving her fingers, I think. And we'll just kind of arbitrarily pick frame 140, and we're going to get rid of everything before that. And really the key to making GIFs out of like videos and sort of real life is to find frames that sort of match up, where you don't have a lot of background movement, where really everything mostly stays static. So in this case, she's still, which is great, and the only thing that's really moving is her arm and her hand. So we can play it through now and see what we have now. And this is good. She wiggles her fingers, waves high, and that's it. And I think that's what we want. And as Richard said before, you want to make sure your looping is set to forever. A lot of times if you import something, it may default to once, in which case it will play through and then stop. And then that's no good. You kind of lose the whole effect of a GIF. If someone misses, if they blink, they miss it. So that's no good. So make sure it's set to forever. Right now we have 36 frames, so we're close. We still want to get down to maybe 24. So what I'm going to do is cut out probably every third frame, I think. And that's sort of an arbitrary number, but that will get us down to where we want to be. And the other thing you want to do at this point, it depends on the footage that you're importing, is look for any, we're gonna cut out every third frame, I think, but we're also gonna look for any bad frames. Sometimes you'll import films that have artifacts and scratches on the original film, and just to keep your GIF at a high quality, you want to get rid of that stuff. So I'm gonna play this through one time and keep an eye out for any artifacts. Oh, there's one. I don't know if you saw that. There's a black dot. There we go. So this frame automatically we're going to get rid of. So you can see that artifact there. And some they're much worse. This is a pretty clean import, so we don't really only have this one frame to worry about. And then we'll go through and we'll get rid of the rest just to get the size down. And this is the case where had I imported every fourth frame, I probably wouldn't need to do this. But I just kind of want to show you what happens if you find out that you've imported too many frames. It's easy to kind of go through and whittle that size down if you have to. And really, people aren't going to notice. The human eye kind of works to our advantage when we're cutting out something like this, because you've still got enough frames to fill in the gaps. So now we're down to 24. That's kind of perfect, I think, for our use. Now the thing you're going to notice is right now the timing is set to like 3/100ths of a second. So if we play it through, it's going to be a little too fast. It doesn't look completely natural, and we still want to go for that natural effect. So the next thing we're going to want to do is adjust the delay timing. So we're going to select all of our frames. And so 0.03 is a little too fast. We can show what it looks like with 0.1 second, 1/10 of a second, and that's going to look really artificially slow, like she's waving through molasses, so we don't want that either. So we'll pick something in between. So we'll pick other, and then we'll just say maybe 0.07. We'll see how that looks. That's pretty good. For now, I think that'll work for us. Let's see. So, and as Richard covered some of the other basics, like image size. Now in this case, we can check and see how big this is. And it's 480, so it's 480 pixels wide, so it's well under Tumblr's limit of 540. I found in some cases you can even push Tumblr's limit to 600. I've successfully posted some GIFs that are 600 wide, but 540 is a good baseline to shoot for. But in this case, we're not going to have to worry about that at all. And then we would go through the save for web, the same dialog that Richard covered. I think I have slightly different, so I only have the optimized, but I could go to the 2-up and the 4-up. So usually you might start with the GIF 128 dithered preset and then make your adjustments as needed. Like he said, the more I would go for the maximum number of colors. Again, this is sort of a fun vintage clip, so we really want to make use of those 60s and 70s colors that they're using in this. As far as these settings, I think as Richard covered, a lot of times it's just sort of trial and error. You want to experiment and see what works best for that particular GIF. If you're working with an illustration like he had, in some cases selective might work better because you've got sort of standard preset colors. In this case, I find perceptual often works well for the color reduction, and then I often go with noise for the dither. But again, if you use the 2-up or the 4-up, you can kind of compare those and see which works better for your particular GIF. But again, there's a lot of trial and error involved, and I can't say for sure which one is going to work better for any particular GIF. But my favorites are usually perceptual and noise. We're going to want to check the file size, which is down here. Now we're at 1.93 megs, so we're just under the 2 meg limit, so that's perfect. Again, we checked the image size previously, but we'll double check and we see we're 480, so we're still well under the 540 pixel wide max for Tumblr. Now obviously if you're posting to other platforms, you don't need to worry about that. We just launched a new channel on Giphy, and Giphy does not have the same restrictions, and they'll actually downsize and create various subversions of your GIFs when you post it, so I'm kind of looking forward to posting some bigger GIFs there. But for Tumblr, which is where we've traditionally done most of our GIF work, 540 is the limit, so you're kind of stuck with that. You can replay just to make sure it looks how you want, and then you would save it and it would create your GIF. Now you notice she's waving, and then it just it's kind of stop, makes an abrupt transition back to her hand. Now suppose you're a little pickier than that and you want a nice smooth transition. This isn't something I do a lot, but you can take your entire clip and you could create a mirror image on the other side and basically reverse it and have everything go backwards. Now in this case it works well, and in some cases the movement might look weird, but I've tried this already with this one and it works really nicely. So what you're going to do is select all the frames. You'll go up, you're going to copy all those frames, and then select the last frame in that sequence. You're going to paste all of the frames you selected back in, and you're going to go to paste after selection because we're going to create sort of a second sequence. Now right now it's just going to make her go through the same sequence twice, but what we're going to do while we have all these still selected, there's an option to reverse. So we're going to reverse these frames, and now if we play it, it's a completely smooth transition from waving to putting her hand back, so you can't tell at all. Now some people might complain that we're working with archival materials, maybe that's disrespecting them, but we're just really sort of having fun with this right now. It's not something I do often, but if you want to make a really nice smooth transition, that's the way to do it. Again, it depends on the footage you have. And then now obviously we've now doubled the number of frames, so we're going to be breaking the file size. So we'd have to go through and select pretty much every other frame to get back to our 24 frame limit. But that you've seen how we do that, and that's easy enough. Now, it might make it a little jumpier, and obviously you'd need to reset the delay timing to make up for that. I don't know if I would quite double it up to like 1.14, but you could just eyeball it a little bit and see what looks most natural. So that's the basic gist of how to make a GIF out of a video sequence. Next, we're going to cover how to make a GIF out of a set of, like a stack of photos, basically. So the other set, we don't need to save that, that you might have downloaded. There's a set of ice cream, a girl eating ice cream at a parade. That was also in the set of files that Samantha provided. So you may have downloaded those as well. So the command for that is a little different. And this is where you have a sequence of photos that kind of go in order. Maybe you had your shutter setting pretty fast. You captured a bunch of photos in quick succession, or you just found a nice transition between two photos. So that's what we have in this case. They're not so quick, but they're in pretty close succession. So we're going to go down. We're going to go to scripts, and then we're going to go to load files into stack, and then you're going to go select your files. So we're going to move up to the ice cream folder, and for some reason it wants to import audio. We don't want that, so we'll select our two ice cream photos. Now this is just using 2 photos. In a lot of cases you'll have more than this. In some cases we have some like really great NASA shots where they've got maybe 50 files in succession of like the International Space Station in orbit, and we've made some really cool GIFs with those. But in this case it's just 2, so it's basic, but it works really quite well with these 2 photos. So we've got them. It created 2 layers, one for each photo, and this will probably be familiar from what you saw with Richard's work. Now the first thing we're going to want to do, if when the photo was originally taken, if the camera was in a still location, then chances are the background and everything between the 2 photos is going to be static. In this case, the photographer or something moved somewhat in between the 2 frames. So if we look, you can see how they're just slightly off. You can see this stone wall here, or concrete wall, which is going to be our static reference point, moves slightly between each frame. So the first thing we're going to do is align these, and that way it'll create a more stable background, and that'll make the animation itself look better. So the first step we want to do is to make the top layer transparent by reducing the opacity. So right now it's set to 100%, so you can't see through it. If we set it down to, I usually go for 50 or 60%, so you can see through it, but you still make out some of the details. Then we're going to go over here and use the Move tool, and I'm actually going to use the arrow keys. They're a little more precise, but you could click and drag with your mouse. So now we're going to move that top frame up until eventually it's going to, you can see the concrete wall here. We're going to match those up until they're pretty much in line. You don't need to be 100% precise, but you know, obviously the closer you can get, the better. So those are pretty close. So I'm going to consider that done and put the opacity back to 100%. Now obviously you can see there's a little bit of overlap where the bottom frame now sticks out, and so if we made a GIF, it was going to look weird. So we're going to have to go and crop these so that really we're only seeing an image in both frames. So I'm just going to use the marquee tool, and I'm going to do a quick select so that I know we're only seeing the image in both frames. We're not seeing any of the black border. We're not seeing any blank spots. And then we'll just go to image and crop. And now you can see we've got our 2 frames. We can deselect that, and we turn them on and off. You can see the stone wall stays in place, so we've got our nice sort of static anchor, and everything else moves. The dog is eating her ice cream. She doesn't notice, or she's being oddly generous. But it's a really fun photo. And now we have to create our animation, because right now I'm just turning it on and off manually. So we'll go down back to the timeline window, turn on the Create Frame Animation button down here, and now you can see it's created 1 frame for us, but obviously we need at least 2. So we're going to go back to the pull down, and the command we want is Make Frames from Layers. Now we've got our 2 frames. Now, as we saw before, we want the looping. Now, in this case, it defaulted to once, so we want more than once. We don't want it to replay indefinitely, so we'll click forever. Like the default timing is 0, which is going to, you know, induce seizures in some people. So we don't want that. So we'll pick what we think is a natural timing. We can go with maybe half a second, which might be a little too fast. So maybe and 1 second might be too slow. So maybe we'll go with 0.8 seconds and see how that looks. That's a little better. You get at least have a chance to see each shot individually before the transition. You could try tweening it. I found in this like Richard showed in some of his stuff. In that case, I don't know if it works so well with this one, but for some photos, that's an option to try the tweening. So I think I'm just about out of time. So that's the other thing I was going to cover if I had time was making stereographs, which I think Richard, with Derek and Shaylin covered last week, and they showed how to use the New York Public Library Stereograminator, which is a really fun tool, so I would encourage you to check that out. And then if you come check out the National Archives catalog, we have a huge collection of stereographs from various geological expeditions, and also a bunch of Civil War era celebrities that Matthew Brady took photos of from that time period. And also I would encourage you to check out our new Giphy channel. We've got 100+ of our GIFs over there, so that's just Giphy/US National Archives. And I'm now going to go and hand it back to Samantha, and she's going to take some of our questions.
All right, thank you, Richard and Darren, so much. That was wonderful. So I am going to go to the question box now. If you do have any questions, please feel free to enter them and we'll get to as many as we can. So for the first question was about the link for the GIMP tutorial. I will post all the links that Richard and Darren have recommended on the workshops page of the website with the recording of today's session later this evening. So just keep an eye out for that. And we can also send out an email to all of those who are registered. So moving on to the next question, Holly says, I'm a little confused about in which case transforming applies to all frames and which it doesn't. Why does duplicating the layer not make it not apply the transformation to multiple frames? So Richard, I think that was maybe a question for you.
Yeah. Can everybody hear? Do you want to switch it over to me and maybe I can show
Sure.
really quickly? So you're asking about like why. All right. You have to think of the frames in here like a configuration of the layers. So in my case, whenever I'm not sure if I quite get the question, but I guess the only things you can do between frames are turn things on and off, or move them around, or add a layer effect. That's all you can do to a layer between frames. If you need to transform something, you need to just like it. This frame is only a snapshot of how you've configured the layers. So if you've done any sort of these transformations, it's going to affect every layer that is visible on. It's just how it works. I don't know if I'm answering your question, but the way to get around that is to create a new layer for every transformation you want to make, so that you turn it on for the frames that you want to show that. I don't know if I'm answering the question, but it may take just some like playing around. No, in my case, I will say that in the panel, I think that new layers visible in all frames, like if that's selected, when you create a new layer, it'll show up on all the frames, and you'll have to go in and turn it off in each frame. But yeah, I don't know. Samantha, does that?
Sure. And we can provide your contact information or at least Twitter handles. So if folks do have very specific questions that it would be helpful to follow up with later, maybe they can reach out to both of you.
I'm more than happy.
Excellent. So the next question says, Photoshop lets me drag in the video file from desktop, but it doesn't show up under import. So maybe this is more of a troubleshooting question.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I've never dragged one in. I've always used to import video frames to layers.
What version of Photoshop are you using? Because I do believe that before CS 5.5, you don't have the option to import as layers. And I'm not exactly sure. I don't use Creative Cloud, so I'm not sure if it has a different way of doing it too. But usually you can, find a good search term, just like, import video into layers, CS, Creative Cloud, and see if that'll help you get an answer. But
okay, thanks. Let's see, next question. Love the new Giphy channel. Do you create GIFs in Giphy for the Giphy channel?
Our Giphy channel is all of about 2 weeks old, so we have not yet experimented. I think I may have made one just as a test. So most of what you see is sort of our back catalog, everything that I've created for today's document over the last 4 years or so. So I think over time we will be creating more stuff in Giphy. So I guess you'll just have to check back in frequently. But thanks.
Great. Let's see. Do images have to be GIF files, .gif, for the load files into stack step? Or can they just be JPEG or PNG files?
They can be anything. It just happens that those are sort of very old files we have in our catalog. And initially, our original import of digital files, they were mostly GIFs. So it's just a coincidence that the files we're importing happen to be GIFs. But we've done it, most often I do it with JPEGs or PNGs.
Okay. Here, I'm going to just show my screen again.
Sorry.
No problem.
Goodness.
Can folks see my slides at this point?
Yep.
Okay, great. So let's see if we can get to maybe one or two more questions. Is GIF pronounced GIF or GIF?
Yes.
I think Richard answered that most diplomatically.
I think how I've referred to it is GIF is the format, GIF is the culture, and so it's really language is mutable and flexible, and the English language is glorious that way. So call it whatever you want. It's how I use GIF, but feel free to call it GIF. I won't judge.
Let's see. Here's another question. Is there any way to tween transformations?
Not really, because whenever you transform, what you're doing is creating a new layer, and it's actually whenever you tween that, it's going to make one layer kind of disappear and the other layer appear. So it won't quite transform exactly like that. What I will recommend is if you want to look around for the keyframe animation, and we obviously didn't have time to get through that. We covered a whole lot, but let me tell you really basically how that works is you tune your layer into a smart object, and that kind of keeps the dimensions, mathematically in the program. And then what you do is you use the timeline and you add these keyframes, and then you can transform that smart object, and it'll know to go from the original, iteration of it to however you transform it. So you can look around. I don't know if I included a link to keyframe animation kind of working, but I know there's a lot of stuff out there on it. It does take a little while to kind of click, I think, but that would be a way to do that tweening where you're transforming. So.
Okay, thank you. Let's see, maybe, yep, another question. If I don't have Photoshop and don't like GIMP, can I do some of this with built-in Mac tools like iPhoto?
Oh, you can do it any way you want. I think one of the first GIFs that I made was this. I found this ASCII art generator, and I took a photo of myself, like a series of photos of me blinking, and then ran it through this ASCII art creator, which creates it out of type. And then I just used this software that I found, which creates GIFs. You just drag the images into it, and it spits it out as a GIF. So you can use, I'm sure that any photo editing software out there, you can probably mess around and make something. MS Paint, you can even cut things out or add things. That's fine. So yes, you can do it. It's a little challenging. I think if you look at last week's one with the some of the makeagif.com, like the online ones, if you assemble your frames as pictures, do whatever you want, whichever way you want to do it, and use one of those to assemble the GIF, that could work too. So.
Yeah, I mean, I say we operate under certain restrictions as federal employees under what software packages we can use. So we're sort of stuck with Photoshop, but there's a variety of other packages and even online tools. And if you can, I would refer back to last week's session, like Richard said, and Derek is sort of the master of sniffing out free GIF tools. So I would check that session out.
All right, well, with that, I think we will switch to a quick wrap-up of our session. So first of all, thank you so much to Richard and Darren for sharing your GIF-making expertise with us, and thanks to all of you for taking the time out of your schedules to join us. Before we end, I just wanted to mention again that the perfect opportunity to try out your new GIF-making skills is coming up in just a few days. Beginning October 1st, our GIF It Up competition will run through the month of October, and all of the submission guidelines and details are available on the website. We did get a question somewhere along the way about, let's see, do's and don'ts or other ethical guidelines about the upcoming DPLA contest. There are some guidelines about what you can submit and where the source material has to be from, and that it has to be copyright free. So all of the details of the sort of submission guidelines are on our website, which you can see here on the slide. In terms of ethical guidelines, certainly we will draw a line in some places, but maybe haven't spelled that out explicitly. But I would say use your best judgment in terms of what you're submitting, and the idea is to have fun and to show off cultural heritage collections in cool ways. So I hope that answers your question. If anyone else has a couple of last questions that you'd like to just type in the box, if there are a few that we did not get to, I will pass them along to Richard and Darren and hopefully get responses to you. But again, thank you so much to everyone for joining us. All right.
Thanks, everyone.
Stop the recording.